Elly was like abundance of energy. She was this tiny woman with big curly hair and pale blue, green eyes, and just very intelligent, very opinionated, great to have debates and arguments with, and great to have a big laugh with.
The thing that most impressed me about Elly's work was her, obviously, the joyful nature of it, but also this lightness and irreverence that came once the works left the studio. There was a complete lack of preciousness for the objects.
She was very generous about her ideas and discussing work in the studio.
She has such a mischievous and playful streak that carried her through all parts of her practice.
I first met Elly in '99 when she and I studied at Chelsea College of Art and Design. We started sculpture there together and we became friends really, really quickly. And we were both sort of really unorthodox in our sort of material choices and liked to experiment. And I think it's those kind of first years in your practice where you somehow, it's that connection to how you're working that kind of will remain with you for the rest of your artistic career, even if it kind of goes into different methods or whatever. And I think I can really see that in Elly's practice.
Elly and I met when we were at the Slade. I was there in 2008 to 2010 doing my MFA and she was doing her PhD there at the time. And we got talking about play. We found from day one that we had a lot of common interests. My methods of layering and fragmenting assemblage are very similar to Elly's, who was very much interested in stacking and piling, and in notions also that we share in terms of collapse and toppling over, and the kind of tension that can be built up within the process of making.
I first met Elly in 2012 when she came to my studio to research an essay she was writing on the work of PAOLOZZI and his influence on a generation of younger artists. I guess it was that essay that then led her to write this phenomenal book on GUSTON, PAOLOZZI and the art of play and the creative process. It's a really fantastic book. I adore both the artists she's writing about, and she writes about them in great scholarly detail, but I'd say it's also really a vehicle for many of Elly's own ideas about her own work. You can really read it and feel her describing her own creative process, her own thought processes and her own methodologies. So although it doesn't mention her work explicitly, it's probably the best way to really understand what Elly really wanted art to do and what art was for her. I wasn't really prepared for quite how fantastic her studio was when I first got to see it. It immediately felt very open and comfortable and like a real genuine space of creative exploration.
She spoke about the studio as a place where you really should have loads of stuff around in order, and that would be the only way that you could create that situation of setting up mess at every stage. And I remember her saying as well, like to know how something would turn out was just absolutely of no interest to Elly, to have any preconceived ideas of a piece of work.
Elly had also planted a lot of amazing and quite exotic plants around the garden, and there was this great relationship between the forms growing in the garden and the forms organically growing up in the studio. And the studio was full of a sense of play and wonder and experimentation. It was everything you sort of wanted from an artist studio. It's probably one of the most fascinating studios I've ever been to, or a studio that most felt true to someone's work and their working process. Somewhere where you really felt someone was thinking through and where the work absolutely emerged from. The work grew there until it was ready, and then Elly would cut it and repot it and send it out to exhibitions.
Elly brought her sculptures to my studio and we tried them against some of the wall paintings I was making at the time, and really were kind of looking at this idea of what it means to make, to set up a mess in the studio, to set up some kind of friction or toppling over for some notion of contingency. And that was really important to Elly.
Play, as she called it, like this play and playfulness and this sort of memory to childhood, it was something, I don't think it was like a nostalgic thing for Elly. I think it was much more about this kind of idea of time collapsing and also perhaps this idea of like sort of entering the ruins of something that has been there. And then of course a sort of intricate sort of knowledge of different sort of materials like paper mache. I mean, I would say she's a queen of paper mache, you know. And also this sort of relationship to the work as a living thing. It's supposed to be handled, not just looked at.
And that's also really seen and felt in her use of materials. Cardboard, use of card, use of papier-mâché, and a sense of throwing things around and really seeing how far she could push the notion of slapstick as well, and that's something she writes about in her thesis.
I'd say Elly had this amazing lack of preciousness about her work, which wasn't to say she didn't care about it deeply, which she did, because a lot of the processes were incredibly laborious. The work would develop at the speed of a plant. It would take a lot of time for her to build up the paper mache forms or stitch together the large soft objects. Lots of things being done once and then reoccurring in another way. So it wasn't that she didn't care, but once the work left the studio, It was sort of meant to look after itself. It was just another thing in the world. You could pick it up, you could carry it around. Watching her install an exhibition is fascinating, the way she would... Everything was kind of equal. Something could be put there, something else goes on top. There was every time everything had to be re-encountered anew, rethought through afresh. There was no fixed answers or rules to how the work could be or should be. And so this sense of play has had one shape in the studio and then another for the gallery. And she didn't seem to mind if things got broken or damaged. It was part of the life form of the objects. There was a lack of sentimentality. Watching her sort of let the forms go and live and breathe and do their own thing was really refreshing and very enviable.
We spoke about this idea of the hand and the digital, and how there's a certain lack of control when it comes to the digital, because it just does as you tell it to do. And actually the lack of control also, there's kind of error that happens with making by hand, and so the digital is kind of very well behaved. I remember her saying to me, and I don't know who she was quoting from, but she was quoting from someone, that there's no dirt in the digital. And that was really of interest to Elly, this stuff that the material that you could really get yourself and others could get stuck into. And that's quite unusual in her process of working, to invite the viewer to really engage physically with her sculptures and with the materiality of her work.
There was a joy to everything she did. I think sort of whirlwind of ideas, and had a light touch and a lightness in the way she approached making exhibitions, which gave them a real sense of joy. When you came into a room of one of Elly's shows, you immediately felt comfortable. Things were familiar in some ways, but then gradually became unfamiliar in another, as you realised things weren't quite as they first appeared. Things had been transformed, or it wasn't simply organic, or it wasn't simply based on a toy. It was a hybrid of many different reference points condensed into one object. And there was sort of these which she writes about in the GUSTON and PAOLOZZI book, a kind of metonymic movement from one form to a next. Things would lead from, like they do in play, one activity leads into another, and you barely know where one starts and the other stops, and the rules are only developed in the rules of the game.
Well, of course, it's it would be like totally remiss of me not to reflect on her not being here, her absence. And it's, of course, tragic that she's not here and she passed away. And it's a real honour to actually show alongside her work. We met online a couple of years before this show happened. We sort of encountered each other's work, and she makes these beautiful sculptures which are in the show. And was talking in a language that I was really sort of keen to learn myself in terms of the sculptural works. And we sent each other these messages, and we were like, we've got to do a show one day. And Ina Allen, the curator of this show, got in touch with me. And we both said that we should do something together one day, me and Elly. And then Ina just popped into our life and was like, I want to put you two in a show together. And it was just like, it just magically happened like that. So it's just obviously meant to be. And I feel a big weight of responsibility really to kind of do justice to her and her work, and I don't really know what I'm trying to say really, other than it needs to be said, I suppose, to just reflect and give thanks to her work really.
She was a fascinating, really wonderful artist, and extremely witty. It's such a loss that she's left. And she's sorely missed, really. But it's great to see her work going up in this exhibition, and I think she would really enjoy that it's coming together in this way.
She had basically put together a whole bag of small sculptures for her friends to take with them after she passed away. It's typical Elly, with her generosity and cheekiness, and also this sort of act of, you know, sort of creating a living archive of her own work. I think that's the essence of Elly's practice in a way. It's kind of a collective sort of engagement in her objects.